Okay, so welcome everybody. We're working with a Pathwork Lecture number 234. So we're up there. It was delivered October 22nd, 1975. And it's a kind of summary and, it also is dealing with some really basic foundational issues, I think. So it's called Perfection, Immortality, and Omnipotence. So saying greetings and divine blessings for all of you, my dearest friends. Oh, we usually check in, but I don't know. Does anybody have anything they want to, check in with a little bit before we start? Okay, I'll just go ahead and continue and, check in, and any questions or anything, like just, jump in if you have someplace that you want to ask a question or make a comment on. So once again, let's just take in his blessings. He says, greetings and divine blessings for all of you, my dearest friends. Divine love is like an immense mantle of finely spun gold, permeating the universe, enveloping everything and everyone existing in all of creation. It is a permanent reality, always accessible in its essence. Only the disconnected mind fails to perceive divine love and moves itself out of grace, as it were. But being removed from grace is only an illusion. It becomes reality for the narrow consciousness that believes that the illusion is real. As you grow on your path and find forever more and deeper connections with yourself and with what is now in you, you finally connect with that essence of yourself that is the state of grace I just described. So, the path is through, and what is existing, whatever now is in us, right? And so your innermost universe, he says, is also the outermost universe, and vice versa. So that's saying a lot there. Feel into that if you can. He says, truly, there is no separation between them. As time is an illusion, so is inside and outside. And so it is an illusion that you are separated from the mantle of divine love, which is also you yourself, for you are part of that mantle. It is not merely given to you or available to you. You are it. I know, my friends, these are difficult concepts to comprehend, let alone to experience in your present state. So let me pause there. Any comments or questions on that? Sort of, it starts with sort of this metaphysical kind of reconnection for us. And then he kind of starts breaking it down. So he says, to those who created the condensation, like he's talking about these air pockets, right? He says, he can use the analogy of an air pocket to convey the nature or life of matter, that this creates this kind of sense of separation. So in the immense sea of divine reality, there are air pocket-like formations and configurations that are produced by states of consciousness. So in other places, he calls them spheres of consciousness. They have their own vibrational rates, their own belief structures. They're these conscious entities in a sense that are, limited to sort of a certain state or attitude or fundamental, belief structure. And he says, to those who created the particular condensation, who are in that state of consciousness, that creation seems both unique and isolated. And I think we've all felt this, right? And I think it's really sort of more our common state in some sense. And oftentimes, when we're children suffering, and we have this sort of sense of, like we're in this place all by ourselves, and, there's not a sense of connection to God and anybody else, right? And so he says, you know, the air pocket you live in is kind of represents your present reality, right? So he says, nothing else seemed to exist because you cannot perceive what is produced from other states of consciousness and development. We're sort of identified with that air pocket, right? You know, we're attached to it, and we experience, it's almost like goggles or lenses that we're experiencing things through. And so you live, the one that you live in represents what you're experiencing. So you could say, like, any kind of disharmony or dynamic or pattern that you struggle with is kind of one of these air pockets. Does that make sense?
So it's not just that we are in a bubble, like the air pocket of Earth, like its own kind of encapsulated level of consciousness. It's also that there's these other bubbles within that bubble of different types of struggles and
Yeah. I mean,
right?
right. We're talking about within each individual, right? You know, like, so who you are is pure, you know, that golden energy, right? You know, you're all one with that, right? You know, but you tend to identify, you tend to recognize and sort of relate to and identify with one of these separated pockets, right? As your personality self, as your particular problem in this moment, you know, it's like, and we also have different, you know, qualities, or, you know, I don't know, different, what I like the word pain body, right? You know, they are literal states of consciousness that, you know, we inhabit, that we think is our reality, you know, we think is ultimate reality, but it's more like our projected reality. And as we begin to recognize, oh, I'm, you know, looking through this lens of belief and of, you know, energetic sort of vibrational, sometimes heaviness or, you know, denseness, right? Then, you know, we begin to realize it's not ultimate reality. It's just the particular reality we're attached to and seeing through in this moment. And it's usually in some kind of distortion, right? It's not ultimate reality. So does that help?
Yeah, that helps. It kind of makes me think of like different parts in internal family systems theory, or
yeah,
just different aspects of ourselves,
right.
and
It's basically
bubble.
Yeah. So here's where, you know, I mean, it is basically the same thing, right? You know, but I think in this way we can expand this to even greater things, you know, like all life has certain area, you know, levels of consciousness. So we can give, you know, tree experience, and we can give rock experience, or we can, you know, have, you know, high, you know, ceremonial experiences, right? And see, you know, at that level, or we can be in hell realms, right? You know, and it's like when we think of it as just in our family system, and usually family systems is kind of taught as parts of ourselves, right? And so again, I think there's a greater tendency than, oh, that's me, right? And so what we're trying to do is even challenge that notion. Who you are is none of that, right? Or all of that, but, you know, who you are is, you know, your own divine nature. And that's what we're trying to do, is shift the identification to that, and allow all of, whether it's our, you know, perfectionist or our lower self or our inner child or something, to, you know, to recognize it as consciousness in its own right, right? That is really, we have with us for a reason, we, you know, to help re-educate it and bring it into the light. But who we fundamentally are, you know, is our real self. And then these parts, you know, or these others, some of them, the guide says, are not us at all. You know, they're just the negative specialists that like to come and tempt us, right? So there's this vast realm of temptations that we have. And some of the temptations are, you know, these old patterns and images that we carry. So we have an experience in life, and our mind immediately recognizes it and says, oh, here we are again, you know, and immediately goes into its reaction to that kind of thing. And you're sort of living out this whole drama, you know, once again. And this is what we're saying is we can question, right? You know, it's like it's a possession in a way. It's a temptation into an identification that then takes us over and possesses us. So I don't know if that sounds weird or makes, you know, helps make sense of it, but I just find that that way of thinking of it helps us again step back a little bit from it. We are responsible for it, but, you know, it's like if we can have compassion for it, if we can see the suffering it's in and not judge it, then maybe we can help it.
The possession to me sounds like I don't have a say. Like it almost sounds like it's happening to me. Which,
it's happening in your unconsciousness too. Yeah, you know, you get unconsciously possessed by these images, by these, you know, belief structures. And that's why the guide says we have to make them conscious. And then we're at choice again.
And then not judge them, or in my case, make them wrong, or try to mind bend myself over them and get through them myself. That's the hardest part for me, finally, in getting pieces of that. That's really
right, exactly. Because we so naturally, because we identify with them when they come up, then we feel like we have to, you know, like get rid of them somehow or fix them, or, you know, so then it activates this whole aspect of ourselves that is actually what causes us not to be able to transform it. So it's like we're working against ourselves. We're creating you know, and trying to improve, we actually are getting lost even deeper. So it's what you're saying, that, you know, like when we can see them, and this is why, again, I like to see them as other than me, is then I have a capacity to care for things other than me better than I have when I think it's me, right? You know, if I think it's me, then I'm much more likely to judge it. If I think it's, you know, just a suffering being, a suffering level of consciousness that, you know, is activated in me, that needs light and you know, compassion, then there's a part of me that opens my heart to it. Does that make sense? We're trying to open our hearts to everything in us. So however it works for you, if it works to see it as your wounded child and you have compassion for your wounded child, you know, the thing is that the universe is filled with suffering states of consciousness. And sort of like the Buddhist, you know, tradition, you know, where most of us are bodhisattvas and we're here, you know, praying and experiencing, you know, the suffering, you know, until there is no more suffering, right? And so we're here, hopefully, when we're conscious enough where we can actually transform that suffering and not stay trapped and lost in it. So, I mean, we're a little a ways away or far field in this lecture, but it's, you know, it's basically around this. So, you know, this is good. And it's a little tricky to kind of convey. So it's okay if, you know, work with it as you best understand it. Most of this stuff, you know, we have to work with as our understanding grows, you know, we get new pieces of insight or new connections, and they're usually the ones we need to grasp it fully, right? You know, so my metaphors may not be the ones you need exactly, but this really helped me actually a lot to open my heart to myself or to all of these rowdy guests that came in and, you know, would sweep and clean, like that Rumi prayer, right? The guest house. So, and then I began to notice too, you know, that in my everyday personality stuff, right? You know, it's like I can fall into a kind of place where, you know, I feel grouchy or I don't like, you know, too much work burden on myself, you know, and I think there's some truth to that maybe I need to like manage a little bit, but there's also a place where I realize, you know, that there's some kind of way that the cup just goes half empty, you know, I was just as busy or, the other day, and I was happy or, satisfied or content in doing it, right? And then something comes in and it feels a little more of a burden, or I feel a little less motivated in one moment, to do it. And I kind of sink into my resistance state, right? I don't really want to do that. And then if I, hang out there, if I, like I can, not want to do anything for the rest of the day or whatever like that, and then when I do it, then I feel like I'm pushing myself and I'm resentful for having to do it, right? And so when we begin to see that these are all kinds of energies that are awakened in us by things that are happening, and it's like we can work with them in this kind of skillful way that recognizes, oh, I'm back in this mood, that's a kind of negative space. So what does that mood need? How can I re-educate this negative lower self child in me? We were talking about that lecture the last time, right? So let's continue. So he's saying, let's see, I think I skipped something here. Yeah, he's talking the next about the higher self, right? So he says, your higher self is, of course, the ever-existing grace of God, the mantle of love, truth, and beauty that permeates all of existence. Your higher self knows states of reality that your conscious mind knows nothing about. Only on the journey to your innermost being do you gradually expand the experience and the knowledge that come from your higher self, allowing it to penetrate the mind of your conscious personality. In the limited state of perception of the conscious mind, the truth that the higher self knows to be real becomes somewhat distorted. And so that's what this rest of this lecture is about, is like we have these sense of things from our higher self, and then bringing it down into the duality of the material world gets us all confused. So perceiving the higher self's knowledge through the maze of the ego consciousness, then takes this higher self truth and somehow makes it untrue. So in tonight's lecture, I will speak about 3 such particular states of reality, which in the higher self are beautiful, but in the ego consciousness become untrue, off-center, distorted, and neurotic. So you must therefore first abandon the distortions on the level of ego consciousness before they can reemerge as truth on a deeper level of consciousness. It is very important to understand this. We struggle constantly because we assume that something is either right or wrong, yet something can be true on one level and untruth on another. So the 3 aspects I want to discuss this evening are perfection, immortality, and omnipotence. Let us see how these 3 states of reality compare when you experience them in the higher self-consciousness and when you experience them on the personality level. Let us begin with perfection. The striving of the higher self for perfection is, of course, a legitimate movement, for the soul knows that this state of reality exists as a living, breathing reality of its own. Perfection of the spiritual entity is very different, however, from the way the ego conceives of it. Perfection, in reality, is an ever-changing flux. There is nothing static about it. One thing is not in opposition to another. Truth, beauty, love are ever-changing manifestations, changing always appropriate to the occasion. Sort of reminds me of the Tao, right? In reality, it's like perfection is this movement between the opposites that make up this kind of balance and transformation that happens here in the physical world. And, we can say, oh, the yin is bad and the yang is good, but it's not the truth. We need them both. It's like dark and light are complementary sorts of aspects. And so he says, therefore, perfection is a constantly moving state, but the ego consciousness conceives of perfection as static, limited, exclusive. Therefore, perfection deteriorates into perfectionism. And when this happens, duality takes its toll. One thing seems good, another bad. You must give up striving for perfection from the ego point of view to truly reach the perfection of the higher self. Any comments want to come in here?
Can we say that again? I think this is important for me, and I think I missed it.
So the last thing was just, we must give up striving for perfection from the ego point of view to truly reach the perfection of the higher self.
I think it was before that when he
Okay.
talked about the balance.
Right, sort of, yes, okay. So, so he's saying, that perfection is a moving thing, right? It's in reality an ever-changing flux, and there's nothing static about it. And so I was speaking there of, what that brings to mind for me, is how, there is this yin and yang, this kind of flow in the physical reality, right? Between the opposites, between night and day, between warmth and cold, between, all of these things. And so, in the reality of the material realm, none of it is good or bad, right? It's always changing through, and it's all in divine perfection. What happens when the ego, it says, oh, well, I like the light, I don't like the dark. So the light is good, the dark is bad, right? And then we struggle to try to keep the light and avoid the bad, or the dark, which, sort of can't really be happening in the reality of things, right? And then we, seem like we're fail at it or whatever, like we get all tangled up in it. So is that?
So the struggle to make, to put the, this line where perfection deteriorates into perfectionism, I'm missing that.
Okay. So the ego consciousness perceives of perfection, as a this or the, like this versus that, like this is good, that's bad, right? And that's a dualistic understanding. And what the guide is saying is in reality that, the universe is not dualistic. It's, this constant flux, and it's all perfect. So when the ego mind divides something into good and bad, right and wrong, okay, not okay, right? That's where we'll then take, a natural perfection, and then, like, well, we have to be only this way, right? So then it becomes, what does he say? Limited, exclusive rather than inclusive, right? So static. So it tries to, make it only one thing, and tries to make everybody be that way, right? It's the control, that kind of thing, in this attempt, to, have one side versus not the other, right? To avoid the other.
Yeah, okay, I see it. Thank you. That makes sense. I get it.
Darlene,
I have a
go
Go ahead, honey.
real quick. Is another way to hold this is that the right and wrong, good and bad on the planetary or the ego sense can be held in a higher sense, where it's, I actually say higher or bigger sense, that both can be held at the same time, in that the perfection of the universe is unfolding in it somehow. Is that valid?
Yeah. I think in some ways, it's always perfect, just as it is. One of the ways that I kind of look at it is it's, it's like it's at the highest state of perfection that it can possibly be in this moment, right? In some way. And, so that's, and it is, it's like, but the other thing that you understand and you begin to discover, I think, in this, and this is part of what he's saying in the movement from dualistic consciousness to unitive consciousness, is as we, in the adult, begin to accept, well, here on life on earth, some of it's good and some of it's bad, some of it's difficult, some of it's, wonderful, right? And we just kind of humble ourselves and accept it sort of a bit more as it comes, and you know, not feel like we have to only have it one way. That's the kind of child consciousness, right? And we expand a little and get that more flexibility and can tolerate, you know, a range of things a little more. Then over time, we begin to recognize even the challenges, even the difficulties. In fact, those were the most growth producing. Those were actually the best times when you look back, you know, in some ways, right? You know, there's a way that what we would have labeled bad in the moment from very limited perspective, you know, actually in reality is exactly what we needed and, you know, was in divine perfection in that moment. And our response was exactly where we are and who we are, you know, like, so it was in divine perfection because we couldn't be any other than what we were. And so if we can be there with ourselves and not think we're supposed to be somehow other than, then we can proceed, you know, grounded.
Darlene, I have a comment. And I think I read one of Eckhart Tolle's books, and he answered this question too to somebody that was asking it in the back of the book. But so this idea for me of judgment, and you know, in not being in non-judgment, it's almost like I feel like without the judgment piece, and I think this is where I'm missing like what judgment might feel like if it wasn't a negative connotation to it, but without the judgment piece, I feel like, you know, there wouldn't be an attempt or an intent to address something that was bothersome or cumbersome. But so I think he answered it, and I can't remember what the answer is.
Okay. I mean, I think it's, you know, that's often the issue, where if we don't judge it, we won't change it, or we won't get better, or, you know, it won't get, you know, like, and I think there's two levels. I mean, I think there's also a fear that we won't be discerning, but I think that is, you know, we can discern, right? We can discern rather than judge. And then also, you know, I think the truth is when we see the truth, we naturally flow in that direction.
Yes and no, because for me, it feels like a lot of times my person still needs a lot of discomfort in order to recognize that it's something I want to, you know,
it takes a while for us to fully recognize the truth and realize the cost of a, you know, unconscious sort of defense, you know, pattern that we've got going. So absolutely, you know, it's like, it's a good, you know, a real deep dig, you know, into bringing it all out, and then, you know, the work of actually programming it, basically, right?
Yeah.
Did my reboot work?
Yes. Hello, Frank.
Yay, Frank.
Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, happy to have you with us again.
The best laid plans of mice and men. Talking about that perfection versus perfectionism.
Uh-huh.
That perfectionism is something that your ISI latches onto. And your lower self knows you can't ever attain it. So that's when the real war begins, or struggle begins, and perfection is just like kicked completely out of the equation.
Yeah,
it's your ISI and your lower self and your superficial ego are all battling over perfectionism.
Agreed. Yeah. You know, it's like that is that kind of like just relaxing out of that place. And it's tough because there's this fear somehow that if we don't discern, judge, you know, like see it somehow clearly, you know, that somehow we can't, it'll override us. We can't, you know, we will be somehow unable to, you know, change something. And I mean, I think there is the surrender thing here where it's kind of like the serenity prayer, right? Sometimes that is where it's leading, you know, but a lot of times if we just accept it in the moment as it is, it's in that moment of surrender that whatever the indwelling consciousness of the higher self then can respond in creative ways, right? You know, it's like, it's not about decision making, it's about choice creating. And if we stay present to something that's you know, confusion or a conflict, or we don't know, you know, and we can see the dynamics, but we don't know what to do, and we can just kind of be there and not knowing, right? You know, and not have to change it or name it, or, you know, like, that's when somehow, to me, the creative, you know, Holy Spirit comes in, right? And we can really see a different level of it, or, you know, something happens that changes the equation, and we're no longer locked in this kind of struggle or conflict inside.
Yeah. You know, I also get the impression that when I read the lectures or even listen to the Eva's lectures, that the guide may have been delivering to what we call that myth-based mentality at the time. You know, it was like, okay, a lot of the people in this room think that if they can behave a certain way, they can attain perfection. But it's not about how you behave, you know. But yet it's like, you know, in that myth-based mentality, it's like, well, if I behave a certain way, then God will grant me favor. Or if I behave another way, God will punish me, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're going to maybe go into some of the God image stuff coming up here too, but exactly. Yeah. And
so when you read the lectures, you kind of have to imagine that, you know, you were sitting in a room with a lot of myth-based people around you, and the guide is sort of like, okay, let's deliver this in such a way that it can, you know,
and I think
everybody in the room.
Right. And I think, you know, like, there is a way that we are much more woken up and sophisticated now, but I think it's like, my experiences in the unconscious levels, this is the part that still is at least what takes me down when when I'm taken down, right? You know, so I'll find some dissatisfaction and something going on. And I like Richard Rohr. I'll probably send it out to people. Like, he's got a nice video called, you know, Everything is a Gift, right? So this is also part of what this is pointing to. And, you know, it's like, it helps me, because there is this kind of tendency for us to feel entitled, or like nothing's right, or, you know, things are not happening. I got really tired, you know, grumpy, you know, all of that. And that's okay. We can be all of that. But it's like, when we identify with that state and, you know, sort of turn against life and turn against ourselves, usually for being that way, then we get stuck in it. So let's see if we can read a little further. I've been liking it when we've actually been taking a whole 2 hours, but we've been able to actually get through the whole lecture. So, but feel free still to chime in. I just want to keep us going a little bit. So he says, the motive is, there is such a thing from the higher self point of view for being perfect and wanting perfection, is love. It is the recognition that only a state of pure love can further creation, can aid the great evolutionary plan. God is perfection. Therefore, the God self is perfect in wisdom, in love, in beauty, in unity, in all inclusiveness, and in the undivided reality in which what is good and desirable for one must also be so for all others. True perfection is a relaxed state of being in which no fear, pride, or self-will exist. It exists for its own sake, simple and pure. Real perfection harbors within itself a state of deep self-recognition that contains respect and love for the self as much as for all other things in creation. So this is kind of like, to me, this is sort of the description of humility, right? You know, deep self-acceptance, but we're equal to all other beings. We're not, you know, any better, any more perfect, right? You know, and there's this kind of you know, we're not in pride, self-will, or fear because we're not trying to attain some high bar, you know, we're just being our simple human selves, giving our best. You know, that's all we need to do. So he says, then hence no proving is necessary. Perfection is wide open and knows no formula and no rigid rule. Inner freedom and security make it possible for the entity to decide spontaneously when to be soft, when to be strongly assert a position. There is no maudlin sentimentality that shrinks fearfully from confrontation. The courage to risk rejection for the sake of help and truth exists without becoming an extreme position of punitive self-righteousness. Expanding, giving, joyful and vigorous expressions of divine reality surge forth in the state of positive aggression, as well as in the state of soft receptivity and acceptance. Perfection is a breathing, living force that heals, grows, and creates because it exists for its own sake. In that state, it constantly expresses a variety of divine qualities, not only love, truth, justice, beauty, but also creative vigor, vitality, myriad expressions of self, of life, forever alternating for the deeply innate purpose of spreading divine reality into all of the void. So, I mean, you know, that's like, we're not quite there yet, right? But can you get a sense of that promise or that possibility, you know, like if you really were just okay with, you know, without having the bar. And that won't mean that you won't strive. You are naturally programmed, your evolutionary being, you know, your real being is naturally wants to grow, you know, it naturally does that. There's nothing we need to try to control ourselves or make ourselves do. Same thing with love. We can't make ourselves love, right? All of the higher aspects, you know, they have to emerge from us spontaneously. And so the guide is saying, you know, what we can do from our ego active place is, you know, look at where that's blocked and just kind of uncover the nature of the images, the fears, you know, the negative beliefs, all of that. But ultimately, you know, the uncovering is not, you know, gonna, you know, be like there's another step that actually frees, but that's what we can do. And then the rest is kind of spirit that happens naturally in the development. So how does striving for perfection look when it comes from the level of the ego personality? What are the motives? What are the attitudes? Obviously, there is pride, the need to be perfect in order to be better than others. The feeling alone totally distorts reality. And, you know, we might feel like we judge that, oh, that's bad, right? You know, so like, let's try to not go there in this moment, you know, and try to understand, okay, so what is this pride? You know, what is this need that comes from inside of us to be better than others, right? Isn't it usually our fear that we're not good enough, or, you know, somehow, you know, as children, we look around and who gets the attention are the special ones, you know, and so like, oh, I want to be special, right? And we don't realize that in specialness is this seed of separation, right? You know, it says, I want to be one up, I want to be, you know, and we think that's what we want. But once we even get there, if we do, you know, we discover, you know, it's not really what we want, because, you know, it doesn't, we want the connection, we want the admiration, we want the love, we want the real stuff, right? You know, but if we're one up now, then everybody is jealous or, you know, trying to take us down, or, you know, sycophantively, you know, supporting us, but we don't think it's real, you know, so it's like, it's better just to be real in so many ways, right? And let go of sort of the way that these defenses are trying to order us, but recognize where they come from with compassion. Again, you know, they're just part of our pain body. At the same time, another person's already developed state appears to diminish you. So that's, you know, that one up, one down kind of thing that we get into here. and attempting to become perfect at the expense of others obviously defeats your very aim, for nothing could be less perfect than the inner greed, jealousy, envy, tight ambitiousness, and vanity involved here, not to mention a very imperfect, limited view of life in which exclusiveness seems a reality to you. So another distortion where, he's just trying to help us realize that there's this part of us that kind of like unconsciously, none of us would consciously say, oh, I want to be envious, tight, and ambitious, but it's most of us are not that bad, but there's all deep in our unconscious, there are these levels of it that are still in us. And this is just the path of purification, right? To recognize it, and without self-judgment or self-hatred, to, take on that child that felt like, that's what she needed in order to feel okay. And try to re-educate her, try to give her love and what she didn't have that caused her to, lose herself. So another distortion in striving for perfection on the personality level is the fear of inner imperfection, a hidden sense of worthlessness that you never fairly space squarely comprehend, work through in its details. Instead, you put on a mask of perfectionism to prove to the world and yourself that the worthlessness you fear, and suspect does not exist. Perfection then becomes a superimposed solution for an inner emptiness, worthlessness that you don't want to experience, you don't want to examine, and you certainly don't want anybody else to see. And so that's part of why we put the mask on. You are untruthful in the sense of not wanting to see what you really feel and think about yourself, but rather striving to appear what you are not. And again, part of that, we're striving to become our higher self, right? But we're not there yet. And so, we can't, it's not bad to, have a vision of what that would look like, or, but we have to purify it, and take out the ego aspects of it. And then, realize that it's coming, but we have to develop into it. So on the ego level, perfectionism becomes, or is outer directed. It exists for the sake of others and for the sake of appearance.
Darlene, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of came up as you were reading that last paragraph. There's a part of me that says, if I give up my striving for perfection, for competing with other people, for on, that I'll lose all motivation in my life. It's a very crazy, interesting. Yeah.
And very, like there is some way in which this voice inside of us that is the pressure in us, that pushes us, that corrects us, that, like somehow it has convinced ourselves that if it weren't there, we would never get up and do a damn thing. Right? Yeah. But I think that's a really interesting thing to question. Is that true? As a Byron Katie, is that really true? Like, how do I know that's true? And when I go in with that, and this was a big struggle for me, because I had a bit of this, in my early youth, and, depression and bulimia and stuff like that. And there was this, real strong forcing current that then would be completely thwarted by the inner child in me that would not respond at all to a forcing current, right? And so like I would feel that way, like I had to push myself to make myself get up and do anything. But when I looked at it more deeply, I realized that the part of me that was so resistant to getting up and doing anything was the part of me that didn't want to be pushed anymore and wanted to do it from their own inner desire to do it. Right? And so it was like so strong, saying, I'm not going to be pushed, and then of course that created more fear in this other voice that says, well, I won't get it done unless I push, right? So it's a vicious circle.
It also takes a chunk of trust when you get right down to it, because it's like, I don't know what's on the other side. I've given that up.
Exactly. And so it's like this new exploration, this risk, even for a little while, don't worry about it because you've got the other one down pat, right? So, you might just, explore here and there, you know, like what happens if I don't make myself do it from that place, but listen inside to my inner animal nature and allow it to follow its own instinctual desire.
Yeah, so far that's been, I'm starting to get that and it's starting to work actually beautifully. But there's a little piece of me is like, yeah, but this is going to end soon or something.
Yeah, and sometimes it does, you know, or, you know, we have to, you know, like rebalance or something like that, you know, so, but I think it is a part of our development, part of our emergent, you know, process. And so we're learning how to flow, how to surf the currents of life and how to, you know, because who we are is already love, is already, you know, desire for perfection, you know, is already omnipotent and immortal, you know, we're, you know, stepping into that, right? But we can't do it from this egoic place. So I can't remember exactly where I am. Let me go ahead and just start at the top here. So if you seek perfection, a divine state, in a state of untruth, the false search must lead to a rigid distortion, truly a caricature of the real state of perfection. Such a prideful, fearful, untruthful attitude indicates a lack of faith in your own deeper nature. Therefore, you hurriedly try to pretend that you are in a perfect state without it having developed organically. The pretense of appearing perfect, which may apply to specific aspects of the personality and not so much to the total personality, implies a dishonesty on the part of the lower self. It is a true cheating, kind of wanting to skip this work of becoming and wanting to attain the end result without paying the price. The superimposed perfection or perfectionism is blind, unsure, and therefore rule-bound. It uses truth, often in a misplaced way, in generalizations that do not fit the occasion. The self then becomes at times wrongly soft, where confrontation and assertion would be appropriate, and intolerant, where acceptance would be appropriate. For many personalities, one or the other of these two attitudes seems to be godly or right, and it is used blindly because it has become structured into the personality. Because you refuse to face your deep lack of faith in yourself, you always project it outward in a cynical and negative attitude toward the world. Alternately, you may put on a false appearance of faith. The self-judgments that you do not face openly distort the personality into becoming self-righteously severe with others. Religionists often distort reality in that way and rationalize their narrow attitude by using religious doctrine. Or you may project self-indulgence and guilt in a different way by becoming overly permissive and sentimental, developing a false mask self of acceptance that is only an appearance. So you can see, like, these things he's talking about here are really, we have to, you know, sort through, and reminds me of sort of the feminine tasks, you know, like we're sorting out the seeds and spinning the straw into gold, you know, and they're very long, laborious, intensive kinds of processes in many ways of self-awareness and, you know, exploration, understanding of what's going on inside of us, and seeing how, you know, there's divinity and distortion in almost everything, right? We have to, you know, not just go, this is good and this is bad, but we have to look for the good and the bad on both sides of things. You can see very clearly, my friends, that you must abandon the claim for perfection for the sake of truthfulness and the humility of accepting your imperfection. And that is indeed the threshold you must go through in order to make room gradually for the ever-existing, unfolding perfection of your soul, a perfection that you will experience so differently when you approach it this way. The humility of giving up perfectionism and the honesty of paying the price for developing slowly into a more genuinely perfect being are prerequisites, which are in fact aspects of your real perfection. It may seem paradoxical, but accepting humbly your imperfect state and looking at it creatively, constructively, and specifically so as to understand and make connections is already a manifestation of the Godhead within. So that ends the section on imperfection, or perfectionism, which is the largest one. Any final comments on that section there? I just want to say again, it is just really tricky because almost everything we observe, the observer of herself, like notices, right? And then right in that noticing, there is this split second, kind of way that we can either just be with it as it is, or we can kind of go to the habitual sort of reflex action. It's like reflexive, right? This is okay, this is not okay, this is good, this is bad, So, it's difficult to awaken and recognize this. And nobody should judge, any of it in themselves, but just continue to welcome awareness, welcome the specifics inside of you that you can begin to understand within these contexts. So let us come to immortality. And I also, like this lecture because we're working with, dying into life and some of those kinds of things in our other studies. And so, this idea of death in life and life in death, and then the immortal soul, so at some level, our higher self knows and feels this true immortality. And it's the state of reality that, is ultimately what's real. But the consciousness that is disconnected from the higher self then warps this truth, right? We sense this. And then in the human thinking process, it translates into an actual awareness of fear of death. Just as the message of the higher self that perfection is possible reaches the conscious personality as fear of imperfection. So, this is kind of a deeper layer of it. You may not recognize it exactly, but I think it's interesting and certainly seems like a logical, thing that he's saying here. And so somehow, this sense of ultimate immortality, brings up our fear of death. So he says, the fear of death says, on the deepest level, I want to experience the state of immortality that I know exists, even though I am caught temporarily in the dualistic air pocket of life versus death, and either or. In that experience, in that vision, when you are in one, you do not see the other, and you fear giving up one for the other. Fear of death also implies lack of faith in the ever ongoing reality of all life, all consciousness. However, when self-will and fear motivate the conscious mind of the outer personality, they both seek out and distort the truth of immortality in order to avoid the fear of death. So this is where he says, we can, get into just adopting beliefs, right, and think that that's going to somehow handle it. And it may until we are facing our death in some way. And it's the same thing, he talks about again, all of the little deaths, all the little losses, all the little endings and, difficulties that we run into are the practice, the little deaths that we practice dying to, surrender into the big death. And he says, the personality fears to go through the tunnel of that fear, right? The fear that, we might, I guess, just disappear, the fear that we have to suffer, or that, the fear of the future. He talks about in one of the other lectures, we don't know what death is going to bring, right? And we can't penetrate that veil. And so the fear of the unknown, and that's always within us, always every day of our life as well. So only when you face the tunnel with courage and go through it, as you must face and go through all feared feelings, you will experience the reality of eternal life, whether you are in the body or outside the body. The motivation for believing in immortality plays a tremendous role here. If you hide your fear of death, your lack of faith, and disconnect your awareness from the inner source of this dark fear, then superimposing the truth from outside will not work. You must abandon immortality and accept mortality until you can truly become immortal. And now let us look at the third of this triad, omnipotence. Let me pause. Any questions or comments on the mortal, immortal part?
It's just fascinating to me that I can take virtually anything that's true and my ego can grab it and turn it into and twist it into a really weird thing that make it sound like it's true. It's hard to say, but yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I hear what you mean. Yeah, it is, it's like, I think, this is where, like, they talk about, the adversary, consciousness, Satan, being a great deceiver, right? And there's subtle lies and sophisticated ways that it works inside of us, right? So, and again, we're not bad because we have it, it's like, we have to be able to just face that, kind of matter-of-factly, and maybe even laugh at ourselves, right? In lots of ways.
I had a
Okay, so the third
about the immortality.
Say again, Jacob?
Yeah, I had a question, thought about the immortality, mortality.
Sure.
Is it talking about like the fantasy, or just the idea, the kind of the superimposed, imprinted idea of immortality? It's basically, the guide is saying drop that and experience your mortality, or go through your thoughts of mortality.
Exactly.
Without covering it up. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And here again, I think he's speaking to something that's like huge in our culture that we don't even recognize, but because of our, denial of death, our fear of death, our, like, we don't even want to talk about it. It's like my workshop on grief, that doesn't have any, it's like, oh, let's stay away from that. So we're always kind of trying to rise above that or deny it, and like he says, yeah, one of the ways that we pretend for a long time, with our belief structure. And, some people, again, depending on their state of consciousness, the belief is good, and it does help them. And there's, some real faith that comes with that. But for many people, just, using that idea, the belief itself, to superimpose over the top of the actual experience, is probably denying some real fear in the soul. And I think some of the, chronic illnesses that people take for a long time to die, maybe even Alzheimer's, maybe an expression, right, of sort of that denial and that inability to move through that place very easily. And we aren't allowed to admit, like, especially those in churchianity, or that, they would be judged, or something if they acknowledge that their faith was not strong enough. Some people do, of course, but, it's again, that mask, and it's very difficult. And with churchianity and those levels of faith that are kind of just at the level of the belief, sort of the mythic level of consciousness, again, it's like the guide is saying, yeah, that's not deep enough ultimately to really address these layers of our being. Life will usually take us there in one form or another, but it is pretty amazing how strongly we can avoid and deny all the way through our death. They even say, some of the stories about, Eva's, cancer and end of life process was similar. Even she was in denial about her death. So it's like, it's a major thing.
Can you say a few more words about that? In what way was she in denial?
I'm just, from the people that knew her, Susan is one that I think has spoken to this, it's like the community had difficulty, like processing what was happening because, she did not ever acknowledge and wouldn't let people speak about the potential of her death as she was dying of breast cancer.
Are they gonna
So-
go for that Saturday night by any chance?
I'm hopefully going to go, and I don't know if Paul knows anything about that. Susan will be on the call, so I think there's going to be time for Q&As and people asking this kind of thing. So, it might be good if you want to log on and explore that some more with some of those folks that have done some research, or Susan who had been with her at the time. Okay, so the third triad, omnipotence. Again, the state of ultimate reality of the soul knows its own omnipotence, its own godness. And you can also, I think, repronounce that as goodness, right? Can you, if you add another O in there, can you feel a slightly different, thing with that? But I think it can be useful. So we think of omnipotence in terms of power, and that sometimes, in our world can be good or bad, so, but it's like, this is godness, this is goodness, and knows of its power to heal, its power to create worlds and to recreate the self in myriad joyful forms, to dissolve these forms and recreate them. But the conscious personality vaguely perceives this state of omnipotence in a distorted form, like the other two concepts. And when this distorted message from the higher self state comes through the thin funnel of the channel that exists as yet very narrowly, its manifestation then is the childish claim for omnipotence that you all know exists in infants and in the infantile aspects of adults. In that distorted, immature state, the self-will dictates total omnipotence. I want it my way. There must be no obstacles, no delays, regardless of the cost to others. I must have my own will immediately, regardless of the consequences. And I mean, I still feel this in aspects of my personality, so, that it's important to recognize these self-will aspects. And I think in some ways the self-will is sort of the last bit of re-education that we happen, but it all is ultimately all together. But it often seems to be a strong, and it's a slightly different way of working with it, is my sense too. So the sense of omnipotence of the outer personality is an insistence on magical solutions that are supposed to eliminate the need to learn and grow from dealing with the realities you have already created, such as frustration, pain, difficulties, struggle. Obviously, this distortion is destructive. It implies selfishness, lovelessness, ruthless disregard for others to the point of cruelty and unreality. I notice in me, it's always a shock when I come out of that state, but there really is this kind of, like, I'm the most important thing in the world. Nobody else matters, right? It's like, I wake up and, oh my goodness. The belief that a sheer act of will can make obstacles disappear, when what is really called for is learning from them through acceptance and thus transcending them. So this is the hard thing for the will. This distortion also reveals a limited outlook on the reality of creation, a lack of trust or faith, and again, the cheating that wants to avoid the labor of the struggle of growth. It is therefore obviously necessary for the growing, maturing individual to abandon the claim for omnipotence and magic, with all the negative traits inherent in that claim. If you have the humility to accept your limitations, you can go through the doorway and gradually expand your power to create. The motive on the higher self level for experiencing the true divine state of omnipotence has nothing to do with pride, self-will, or fear. It does not exclude others. It always includes them. It is a powerful, bright force of self-expression that never infringes on others. The kind of omnipotence attempted by the immature state always infringes on others, wants to limit them for the sake of its own greater power to subjugate others as the tool for itself. The divine state of omnipotence enjoys the equal omnipotence of others. I like that. There is never a power struggle between entities in this state. We celebrate the power and the strength and the capacity and the, effectiveness of others, right? Let us see, my dearest friends, how you need to give up a pretended state in order to regain it on a genuine level. You need to lose sight temporarily of the goal. You need to give up your claim for the ego's perfection that is based on pride, comparison, vanity, fear of your own insufficiency. You need to have the humility to see your imperfections. That in itself is the surest, fairest way to get you closer to perfection. Your belief in immortality needs to be abandoned temporarily, even though it may be quite accurate, because in spite of your belief, you still cannot conceive of the switch of consciousness on a feeling experiential level that takes place when you leave the body. There are still only words for all of you. You know, we haven't experienced it yet, you know, so we can only at some level, you know it on that level. It's important that you give up using these words to deny your vague unrest, your anxiety, or your fear of that unknown state by superimposing on them true principles and the facts of the greater life. So, you know, a lot of us know these things, right? You know, we believe them actually, and in a deeper level, we have a sense of deep inner knowing of them, right? So then when our lower self-child comes in, or other aspects of ourself that are feeling fear or, you know, lack of more immortality or whatever, then, you know, we tend to say, oh, that's not true, just remember this, you know, and we try to superimpose, again, the belief on top. And what we want to do is welcome the fears, welcome the anxieties, and, you know, just allow that to be a part of what, you know, is real, right? What is being human. You need to admit your fear, your puzzlement, your state of anxiety, the feeling of being at a total loss. For you truly confront a wall which you cannot penetrate as yet. This wall is of your own making. It is a result of your disconnectedness and the turn your mind has taken in the particular air pocket of your condensed reality. However, that self-created wall can crumble only when you accept its existence and let yourself feel the feeling that this wall elicits in you. You need not abandon the ideas, the understanding that you have about, you know, faith, omnipotence, immortality, etc. But you need to admit that the ideas are only ideas for you, and that your feelings are far removed from them, and that you do not fear the black wall of the unknown, and that you do fear the black wall of the unknown, which you must traverse. You have to go through similar walls of the unknown practically every day of your life if you wish to live fully and not in self-limitation and self-deprivation. This will make it possible, even while living in the body, to truly experience a shift of consciousness. You traverse walls of unknown terror in your pathwork as a result of your commitment to your feelings that you had denied. Pain, hate, self-rejection, guilt, rage, all shades of fear and terror, as well as the even more feared feelings of love, sexuality, bliss, and oneness. As you learn to travel through these feelings in spite of the initial fear to do so, you experience a wonderful new freedom, a wonderful liberation and enrichment. A previously unknown state becomes a known state. Only going through them can truly free you, so that you will never again fear them to the same degree. If you repeat this every time a residual fear of any feeling surges up again, eventually no residual fear of any feeling or state will remain. When you embrace expansion into new territory in your daily life, when you stop hindering your expansion because you have the basic faith and courage to go into an unknown state, you make the unknown into a known. Every feared unknown, be it a feeling that you designate as negative or an expanded new state of experience that is truly positive, seems to you a black wall that you fear and wish to avoid. Avoiding it prevents your ever-flowing movement of life from taking its natural course. So by abandoning temporarily the outer theory of immortality and accepting your fear of mortality, you can go through a black wall and truly realize immortality as an experienced fact. The same with perfection, with omnipotence, or with many other states of reality. This is also true of the feelings you are terrified of. Once you have traversed them, you will experience the state that truly proves you need not fear them. As to omnipotence, you already work extensively on that. You discover the infant in you who demands omnipotence and magical solutions. You express those claims and desires and your rage when those desires cannot be fulfilled. You learn to accept the limitation of your present personality. You need humility to accept this. You need faith to give up what you believe you must have right now, especially if it is a forceful movement that disregards the rhythm of life in yourself and in the lives of others. Only by that action of love, trust, decency, honesty, and humility can you then come back to omnipotence in an entirely new and different way. You are increasingly discovering new strengths, new creative power, new abilities, new intuitive faculties that you never thought possible before. They are a direct result of giving up the false version of perfection, immortality, omnipotence, and other states into which you need to develop gradually.
Darlene,
Uh-huh.
had the phrase spiritual bypass not been coined yet?
I don't think so, yeah.
Because that's what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
he doesn't ever use that, you know, and that's our common one that we use, right, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, it's so easy to do that, right? Again, you know, we think, oh, we know that's bad, and now we label that bad, you know, right? So it's like, but you know, it's like we just want to keep embracing everything that is coming to us, and embracing even the fact that we're not embracing it, right? You know, it's like we have to keep stepping back behind what is and saying yes to it, and it's tricky. So he says, humanity's confusion of these states at this point of time of your history is very significant. Let us shed light on the evolutionary movement in this respect. In previous times, when religion was strongly represented in the life of humanity, the postulated truth was accepted. Humanity at that point in its development had to consider these principles intellectually at first, being unready to deal with them emotionally. This was a necessary beginning at a certain stage of development. It is always so. First, a new idea has to be considered before it can be incorporated into the deeper consciousness. The new truthful ideas must come from the outside in order to facilitate the opening of the channel so that the inner self can then bear them out through experience. More highly developed followers of the inner religious movements always knew that these states of perfection existed within humanity as a potential to be realized. They always knew that God is within, and they always postulated this. And I see that, you know, you go back and really read some of the original, you know, texts and the, you know, of the desert fathers, of the, you know, different monks, you know, like, it's like, it's amazing, you know, of enlightened gurus and sages, right? You know, it's always been there. However, at the time, it could not be more than a theory of fire wiggle for most of us, right? You know, this truth was then misunderstood, misrepresented, and misused by the prideful, domineering, fearful ego. So that perfection was forced, pretended, punitively dictated in order to allay the fear of facing those roots of the personality where those states of perfection could not yet exist.
You know, it occurs to me that the same thing would happen today by, you know, fundamental religionists if they were presented with this, you know, pathwork. They would say, "Oh my God, it's blasphemy. It's like you people are crazy. You're a fucking cult. You need to all be killed." You know, I swear, I think it's still as far along as we claim to be. I think that if this was thrown into the mainstream, really into the mainstream.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, Ken Wilber says, like, maybe if we're lucky, 70, you know, like 30% of the population is beyond mythic, right? You know, so if you have 70% of the population in mythic or below, You know, like so much for democracy, right?
Right.
You know, it also gives me a little chance growing up Catholic and throwing it out. It all kind of makes sense now. It puts it in perspective, and I don't have to not so much beat up the Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah. It's a necessary stage of development, right? You know,
Right.
we've all been through it, and you know, it's kind of like this is part of that stages of consciousness that Ken Wilber talks about. But you really, you know, you can't talk another person into another level. You know, it's what you're saying.
Right.
You know, this they would see this as blasphemy. So they have to grow into it in their own, and so it's kind of like the same thing as you can't. Like a 3-year-old has a different stage of consciousness than a 12-year-old, and you wouldn't expect a 3-year-old to be able to do what a 12-year-old can do, right? It's literally, you know, levels of development and can't be, you know, demanded or made happen, you know, by our self-will or our forcing current. So in a way, it is like how, you know, we have to trust something bigger than, you know, that's leading us, because, you know, the leading edge maybe is also more powerful in some ways than the, you know, the masses, you know, with its additional light and understanding, hopefully. So,
Yeah.
but I think,
Well, I was just saying, it's not for me. It's more enlivening to live this way, like that I can keep growing and evolving, and that's the aliveness for me.
yeah, amen. Yeah.
And at the same time, I was thinking of Jesus. I mean, he had some amazing depth of insights 2,000 years ago that are now we can bring forward only now. And the church couldn't do it all those years. It just misguided itself.
Yeah. I mean, there were individuals within all throughout time, and the guy talks about this in the cosmology, you know, where there were emissaries from the levels of light always coming in, you know, trying to guide, you know, but yeah, it's only been since the sort of the Renaissance and the age of reason, really, that the level of rational consciousness has existed on the planet. You know, in by any, you know, large number. So he says, in the New Age, everything leads to a discovery and a fusion with the inner levels, a fusion of the dualities of the either or principle. You will find that you are neither perfect, nor do you give up perfection forever. You are neither immortal, nor do you give up immortality forever. You are neither omnipotent, nor do you forever remain limited and separated. You will find that different truths apply to different levels. On the outer level of your personality, you are indeed not perfect. You are indeed mortal. You are indeed far from being omnipotent. But absolute perfection, immortality, and omnipotence exist already within you. Only as you abandon your insistence of possessing them right away will you even know what is perfect and what is not perfect, what is life and what is death, what is power and what is weakness. When you are in the dualistic confusion, you do not know. You often think you know what is perfect and imperfect, but you do not really know because you lack understanding and cannot see far enough into the chain reactions. You do not perceive the dynamics. You often believe that something is death when it is really life, and life when it is really death. For example, when you deaden your faculty to feel, your faculty to experience deeply and vibrate with life, you think you are alive. And you think slipping through the gate means being dead. Even during life in the body, you believe that experiencing your pain and terror or your imagined worthlessness is death, that it will annihilate you. When you muster the courage to go through it in a real way, you will find that you have gained a new life. In fact, those very feelings you feared as death itself contain much more of the life energy and vitality that you have deliberately deadened. So you see, my friends, even knowing what is the one and what is the other cannot truly be possible on the level of personality of the conscious mind. In knowing this, you will perhaps gladly learn not to insist any longer on the distorted perfection, immortality, and omnipotence that grow out of fear, lack of faith, self-hate, limited vision, pride, impatience, distrustfulness. You will learn to abandon them as you go through the feelings that create the urgency to be in these states. Thus you will traverse gates, tunnels, and walls. There are human beings who have established a good connection with their higher selves. In that area, they may have a flowing, beautiful channel where the conscious mind can indeed be inspired, guided, instructed by the inner God. However, if the conscious personality then believes that he or she is now truly safe and has in all areas the connection, that could become a danger. Where the disconnectedness exists, the channel is not open and cannot come through, no matter how open and truthful it may be in another area. So this is part of, recognizing that we are variously developed in various areas. So, we have connection with our higher self, and a lot of that is really great, and then, then there's some areas, like I was saying, this place in me where myself would get so triggered, and, that, it seems like we work on forever, to try to see what, how to, re-educate it. He says, there's a specific danger point on the road to opening our channel. And that's part of what we're doing, is trying to, clear the resistances, the blocks, the defenses and stuff like that. And when we do that, right, what happens is our channel to God opens up. And so, there are some dangers with that. And all of us, like we're all working in some ways, but he says, once someone's channel has been established, the person comes sometimes to believe that the divine self that functions and communicates so beautifully can point out all of his or her blind spots. And I think this is important, because I would like this to be true. And but it's like, there's a funny way, which unless we're really seeking or questioning, the higher self doesn't, point out our faults and flaws so much, and especially the ones we don't want to see, right? We have this fundamental free will. So again, we have to keep willingly saying, I choose to see, I want to know, right? And, just not assuming that because we're open in some areas that the higher self will, guide us in all things. If we become self-enclosed, the remaining pride may close us to the help from others, and this is important in being in community and community of peers that sort of, can do this work, is that then we can, reflect back to each other and sort of be feedback and challenge sometimes things that we don't see ourselves. Many highly developed spiritual innovators and channels have later deteriorated because of the ignorance of these dynamics, right? And then the inner God never forces something on the self that the self does not actively seek. So any questions or discussions about that little aside there? So he says, ask yourself deeply, where do you still resist and defend? Where do you hold on and have a stake in not letting in anything that might seem threatening to you?
Can we go back to that one line?
Mm-hmm.
The inner God never forces something on the self that the self does not actively seek. It's like, that's one of those lines that just immediately became cloudy for me for some reason.
Okay. So, like to me, it's again connecting to that free will, right? Like if we deep inside don't want to see something and are in denial or in defense around it, we may, run into the suffering that causes, right? But we won't have the grace or we're not forced to deal with it, It's only, and I think this is appropriate, like there's sometimes I can remember back when I was in my perfectionism and, could see I had so many faults, like I did, and each one of those faults was what was keeping me from God. And I didn't know where to start, and I had to fix them all tomorrow. So, there was this confusion about, where to even begin. And so I could begin to see, I just need to deal with what's in front of me, what's here on my plate right now. The guidance of my life is coming, and in this moment, this is up for me. And if I can honestly and consciously ask and seek for, the truth in whatever is there, as it unfolds, then I think, it helps us not go crazy with that whole other thing, because there's always deeper layers of us that are coming up and are going to be, presented. And I think it happens as we uncover and go through, healing certain things, and then new things come up, right? And we get to certain stages where we can more actively seek a more sophisticated or difficult level, on our path because of the development that we've come to. So, there's, I think, a deep inner wisdom in, again, our organic, natural unfolding is part of what that's saying. And then it's also saying, don't expect God to fix you, or show you, like what needs to be fixed, unless you are somehow conscious of it to some degree and, looking into it. We have our part to play in some sense. Does that help?
Yeah, I don't know, as part of me wants to substitute some words, like for inner God, higher self. The higher self never forces something.
Yeah.
Never forces something on the lower self that the lower self does not actively seek. Is that, can you?
Yeah, I mean, not just lower self, but, personality level self, ego self.
Ego self. Okay. So, all right. Yeah.
And there's other places. I mean, the guide literally says, the higher self, the inner God, the Holy Spirit, they're all the same thing. So ask yourself deeply, where do you still resist and defend? Where do you hold on and have a stake in not letting anything that might seem threatening to you? Even where the open channel already functions, its messages might be mistranslated and misused in order to perpetuate any resistance that we have. Distortions not only exist in respect to the triad of perfection, immortality, and omnipotence, but in many areas of life. And I find this very useful, like whenever we're in an either or kind of dynamic, to really do this thing of looking at it, of like, well, what's the divinity and distortion on both sides of the either or. So it says, your path is indeed a blessed venture. If only you could see the difference of your inner landscape after the initial steps you have already undertaken. And the first steps are always the most difficult ones. And if you could only see the still more glorious, expanded inner landscape that will become your own home ground when your commitment to all of yourself and to the truth of all being is constantly renewed and rooted in you. If you learn to have faith in periods of darkness in your life, these very periods will, and already do, shorten as your path progresses. They become less fearsome and less frequent. Continue on your beautiful journey. There is no better one. All of you are blessed in the deepest possible way. You incur an extended blessing for every step on your way, in love and in faith. Be your God. Okay, any last comments or?
I can see why you like this lecture. That's beautiful.
So good. So we're able to follow and get into it a little more. Good. Okay, well, thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much, Darlene.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
darling.
Thanks, Darlene. That was great.
Night.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.